I wanted to make a follow-up video on a series of videos that I put forward last summer on an experiment in softwood propagation. For those of you that have been following the channel closely, you're already familiar with this experiment, and if you haven't, or if you want a refresher, I'm going to link here, and I'll continue to link throughout the video that explains what that experiment was. And now what I'd like to do is go through after winter, pretty intense long winter, and look at which plants worked with that experiment, which didn't, and some observations as I move forward. So what we're looking at here is a bed of cuttings, softwood mid-season growing cuttings that were in the bubbling water with no rooting hormone until they started to show the promise of roots, and then planted out in this bed to either grow or die for the season. And then I'm sampling whether or not they've worked out based on that they've leafed out or not in the spring here. It's easy to say that, oh, it has leaves in the fall, so it must have worked, but it's really after a winter, especially in a cold northeast winter, that you can see if it leaves out that yes, it did actually root. So let's look through these plants and see who did the best. Really interesting surprise for me, this is Viburnum trilobum, which is the American highbush cranberry, and this is a particular cultivar that I'm interested in seeing more of. And I'll be honest, last season when I stuck these cuttings, I thought they had lost their leaves and died, and yet here we are. I would describe this experiment as close to 100% success, so certainly we'll be trying them again. In this area, it's mainly different varieties of compelling and interesting willows. They rooted nearly at 100%, but that doesn't impress me as far as the functionality of the bubbler or softwood. They will root pretty easily no matter what time of year, but it's nice to know that the system didn't hurt them, so that's good. Interesting thing, I'm not quite sure what to make of it. What you're looking at here, it's more or less, it's 1, 2, 3 rows of 3 different types of cuttings. On the left is a type of grape, and I'll be honest, I thought that would have taken off like mad with this system, but perhaps it was just too cool, too moist, and the cuttings didn't take. But I got near 0% with them, so I think what I'm going to focus on this year is doing layering, serpentine layering and approach layering for our grapes to see they root very well with that, and we'll talk about that in other videos. And then here's one variety of Seaberry, which is close to 0%, and right next to it, this was Lake Cora, which is a German variety, and then this is Russian Orange, which is near 100%. And if I'm not mistaken, I took the cuttings pretty much the same time. I would have thought I took the same type of cuttings, but there must have been some variable there. All that aside, the number one goal for me with this project was to really get on top of an effective and reliable way to propagate Seaberry, and seeing, I would say, 80-90% success rate with this variety, and knowing that I have named cultivar varieties that I can replicate readily, that if this is the only thing that worked with the project, I'd say it was a success. But it's interesting to see some truly failed and some truly succeeded. I had access to a small number of actively growing sticks of some very promising cultivar goji berries. Goji tends to be pretty easy to propagate in general, certainly worked quite well here. You can see, this is a lesson I'm learning, goji absolutely hardy to zone 5B winters, but you get down below -10 or so, and a lot of times the stems get burnt below the snow line, and then they re-emerge from the ground. So for those of you that got goji berries from us, if they didn't leaf out along the whole stem, they almost certainly will from the ground. Learning that as we go. Goji's pretty easy overall. We could do hardwood cuttings, but I had access to those during the summer, and it's nice to know I can replicate that for sure. A little harder to read what's happening here, but these are all hardy kiwi cuttings. Now we had a frost the other night, and so these had started to actively leaf out and then got burnt by the frost. That's not the fault of the softwood propagation system, that's just our climate. And here is a male hardy kiwi. It looks, I would say, like we got somewhere in the 60 to 70% success rate. So I'll lift these plants and plant them out in a common bed and stool them throughout the season so we can get way more plants from that. We'll talk about that in more detail soon. Another very, very exciting positive feedback. I took cuttings from a sweet scarlet cultivar gumi from a friend during mid-season. And this was another one that I thought was not going to work. I feel like a lot of the leaves dropped off. It seemed like it would be a failure, and yet I'm seeing at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 out of the 15 to 20 that I took. So not stunning numbers, but enough that for a couple of twigs cut in the summer, we'll be able to plant out a little patch of some very delicious gumi. Another bed here of sea buckthorn or seaberry, a little bit less promising than the other, but it looks like from around 25 cuttings I'll get about 10 that I can dig up and either put in pots, or most likely I'll put them in another bed to grow on for the season. The female hardy kiwi got similar results to the male hardy kiwi, about 50-60%. Now keep in mind, this is with unfiltered pond water, with uncleaned pruners, with plants. I took cuttings at whatever random time I had the time or I was given access to those random cuttings, and planted in a mix of soil that I made up myself on the edge of a woodland here, basically. So nothing special about this whole system, and certain things failed nearly completely, but overall I've got the equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of plants for about $40 worth of parts and electricity. Very worthwhile, and I'm going to document again some updates and changes that I make to the system to try to get even higher results. But if you're thinking about doing softwood propagation with a aerated water bath in order to stimulate rooting, it seems promising. Anyway, thanks for watching.